What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Let's Talk Movies. I'm Brad, and once again, the Hellraiser franchise has been reignited, but unlike many of its predecessors, this time in a pretty new and exciting way. Now, one of my goals for the coming year was to go back and hit some of those films that I happened to miss back in 2022, as well as staying up to date on newer horror releases as well, and Hellraiser 22 was at the top of my list when it came to the horror genre. If you remember when the news first broke that Jamie Clayton would be portraying Pinhead in a brand new adaptation of the original film, I think it piqued many people's interest, including my own. Now, admittedly, I don't have a whole lot of nostalgia for the original film or for the franchise as a whole, but this newest adaptation definitely piqued my interest as it did a lot of people. Pinhead, or the Hell Priest as he's also called, is a pretty cool character after all, and I think that there's a whole lot that you can do with the lore and the mythology of those characters, and I had always kind of felt that they never really used the Cenobites to their full potential. We got some cool scenes, we got some cool moments, and we got some really cool looking creatures, but I was pretty excited to see how they were going to explore the lore and the mythology and to see whether or not the Cenobites would take center stage in a new adaptation or not. And fortunately, I was pretty satisfied with the direction that they took, both for reinventing the franchise in a new way and for putting those Cenobites and putting the Cenobites center stage in a really cool way. Hellraiser, a reinvention of Clive Barker's 1987 classic of the same name, centers around Riley, a young woman that is struggling with addiction and must confront the sadistic, supernatural forces behind an enigmatic puzzle box responsible for her brother's mysterious disappearance. So for starters, for me, I think that this film was a perfect opportunity to dip our feet back into this world, but to also reinvent things a little bit. This newest installment is not a straight-up remake or retelling of the original story from the 1987 film. It doesn't even try to follow necessarily the same beats and the same formula, which I very much respect. This is a very loose reinvention of the original concept of that film. For starters, I love that this film focuses on the lament configuration and on the puzzle box itself. In a way, you could almost argue that the puzzle box is the main character of this film. And I say this semi-sarcastically, but I felt like at times the puzzle box had a little bit more character development than some of the film's actual human characters. One of the couple drawbacks to the movie was that I didn't necessarily feel super connected or engaged with many of the main characters. And, while I do understand what they were trying to achieve with Riley's character, given her drug abuse issues and her obvious relationship issues, I didn't find myself really rooting for anybody in particular throughout the film. Now, with that being said, there are good moments, and she does end up making certain decisions within the third act of the movie, which is really the best part of the film that does sort of complete her arc in some way. The film is also a pretty slow burn, coming in at over 2 hours long, and I wish that I would have been a little bit more into the characters to help progress and push the story forward, because if I'm being honest, it really took until the halfway point for me to completely feel 100% invested in what was happening. The one thing that really keeps you going throughout that first act and a half, 2 acts, is the looming threat of the Cenobites. Speaking of, were easily my favorite part of the entire film. Anytime they were on screen, they completely stole the show. Now, they did reinvent the look of them as well. While their on-screen presence does feel very much like the original film, the look is less leathery and gothic, and it leans more towards a tortured, mutilated look, almost like their skin has been transformed into clothing, revealing their wet, slimy flesh underneath. It's less sexual looking and leans more towards a supernatural, ghostly look. Fans of the franchise will know what I mean when I say that the original film feels icky. This installment feels much cleaner than the 1987 original. The gore is there, but in some instances, I actually felt like there was a ton of tension and build up to a moment that never really paid off. Compared to some other recent horror films of the last decade or so, the gore is actually fairly minimal, which I'm okay with. I'm not a horror fan that loves lots and lots and lots of overly gratuitous blood and gore, so I can deal with that stuff being underscored just a bit. There were actually a couple of moments where I was expecting much more of a gruesome kill than we actually got. Now, I'm not sure whether or not that was a conscious choice from the production team or not, but nevertheless, you don't feel quite as grossed out and taken back by the gore and the visceral nature of what the Cenobites are doing to people. Jamie Clayton as Pinhead was a stroke of pure genius and pretty much the highlight of the movie for me. If she ends up being the one that Doug Bradley permanently passes the Pinhead torch to, I think that character is in great hands. There's an ominous, powerful aura to that character, and she absolutely knocked it out of the park. She stole pretty much every single scene that she was in throughout the duration of the film. The film is well shot. The cinematography is done in such a way that it's moody and it's atmospheric. And another huge positive for me is that the architecture utilized in one of the film's main locations, I can't really go into that without it getting into spoiler territory, but it really draws lots of parallels to the puzzle box itself. I mean, I'm telling you, the lament configuration, it really feels like it's its own character within this story. And I love that. Overall, Hellraiser is a 6.7 for me. Earlier, I had said that the film feels like we're just starting to get our feet wet, and I think I'm going to stand by that. I'm not sure whether or not it's due to the fact that I wasn't super into any of the main characters, or due to the fact that it's fairly slow paced throughout the film. Like I said, that third act is really where it starts to shine. But the movie seems to ask far more questions than we really receive answers to, and in a way it almost feels incomplete, which also, on the flip side of that, the door is certainly open for lots more from David Bruckner and for this new world that they've created. And for me, I will be very interested to see where a potential sequel goes. I think there's much more story to tell for the Cenobites and for whatever other characters they start to build and create throughout this world. Guys, that's going to do it for me. New episodes of Let's Talk Movies and Purely and Simply Evil premiere every single week at 8 p.m. Eastern. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at LTM Podcast. We have such sights to show you, and we'll talk to you next time. Peace.